Nestled between the towering ridges of the Lebanon Mountains and the shimmering expanse of the eastern Mediterranean Sea, the ancient land of Phoenicia occupied a narrow yet strategically vital strip of coastline. It stretched across what is now modern-day Lebanon, with parts reaching into coastal Syria and northern Israel. This was a land of striking contrasts. To the east, steep slopes and forested highlands rose sharply, rich with the famed cedars of Lebanon, tall, resinous trees that would become the backbone of ancient shipbuilding and temple construction. To the west, the sea opened wide, inviting exploration, trade, and cultural exchange. Yet for all its natural beauty, Phoenicia was a land of limits. Its narrow plains offered little room for agriculture. The soil, though fertile in pockets, was confined between mountain and sea, leaving the Phoenicians to turn outward to the horizon. With little land to farm, they learned to harvest the ocean's bounty and build harbors carved into rocky coves and promontories. These geographic realities shaped the Phoenicians' destiny. Cut off from inland expansion, they became masters of the sea, artisans of navigation, trade, and maritime diplomacy. Their homeland did not invite conquest or empire. It invited movement, contact, and connection. And so, from this coastal ribbon, a civilization emerged that would thread its influence across the entire Mediterranean world, not by the sword, but by sail. The land of ancient Phoenicia unfolded under the rhythms of a Mediterranean climate, a pattern of mild, wet winters and long, hot, dry summers. This climate gave the region a distinct cycle. Rain fed greenery in the cooler months and golden, sun-baked hills in the summer heat. But while the climate was kind, the land was less generous. The strip of coastline the Phoenicians inhabited offered little in the way of broad, fertile farmland. Instead, they relied on narrow valleys tucked between the mountains and the sea. These small pockets of soil could not support grain-heavy agriculture like Egypt or Mesopotamia, but they were ideal for hardy crops: olives, grapes, figs, and a few pulses and vegetables. What they lacked in abundance, they made up for in flavor and trade value. The true natural treasure of Phoenicia, however, lay in its mountains, the towering cedars of Lebanon. These ancient trees, tall and fragrant, grew thick in the highlands. They provided more than shade and beauty, they provided a livelihood. Cedar wood was strong, straight, and resistant to rot, making it perfect for shipbuilding, temple beams, and luxury construction. Egyptian pharaohs, Mesopotamian kings, and even early Israelites prized it. From their forests, Phoenicians carved out not just wood, but wealth. This blend of natural scarcity and selective abundance shaped Phoenician attitudes. They learned to maximize every resource, trading timber for grain, wine for metals, and cloth for pottery. Their land was not a breadbasket, but a marketplace, and it set the stage for people who would come to thrive not by what they grew, but by what they could offer to the world. Bound by mountains on one side and the vast Mediterranean on the other, the Phoenicians lived in a land that offered no easy path inland. But what their geography denied in territory, it offered an opportunity. Facing the sea, they did not retreat, they launched forward. From the earliest days, the Phoenicians embraced the maritime life. Small fishing boats and trade vessels were built in quiet coves along the rocky shoreline, carved from cedar and lashed together by skilled hands. They fished the coastal waters and ferried goods between neighboring cities, learning to read the wind, the waves, and the stars. Unlike empires that looked inward to conquer their neighbors, the Phoenicians looked outward to the open sea. With limited farmland and few inland cities to dominate, the ocean became their road, their lifeline, and their world. Their ships evolved quickly, from simple paddled craft to sail-driven vessels capable of crossing open water and enduring the challenges of long-distance navigation. The coastline itself shaped their habits. With no wide plains or central river, they developed as a network of coastal city-states, each anchored to its harbor. Communication between these cities and with lands far beyond came not by land, but by boat. Maritime culture was not simply a necessity, it became their identity. Their gods had sea temples, their myths were tied to islands and voyages, and their economy was built on salt air and moving tides. In time, their ships would pass beyond Cyprus, beyond Crete, and eventually across the Mediterranean. sowing the seeds of Phoenician influence from one coast to another. Long before the rise of the Phoenicians as maritime traders, their cities were already ancient. Chief among them was Byblos, known as Gubla in local tradition, a city that had stood since at least 3000 BC, making it one of the oldest, continuously inhabited places in the world. Byblos began as a modest coastal settlement, but quickly grew into a major urban and religious center. Its location made it a natural hub for trade with Egypt, and its temple architecture and burial practices show a deep exchange of influence. Over time, other cities emerged: Sidon, Tyre, and Arwad, each developing its own identity, yet sharing the same cultural and spiritual foundation. By the late Bronze Age, these cities had stone homes, planned streets, temples dedicated to their gods, and city walls for protection. Unlike the pastoral communities inland, these were fully urban societies. Temples crowned hilltops, markets buzzed near harbors, artisans carved ivory, inscribed stone, and dyed fabrics in vibrant purple. Beneath their growth lay deep Canaanite roots. The gods they worshipped, the myths they told, and the art they created all echoed earlier Canaanite forms. But the Phoenicians did not merely copy, they evolved. Their religious symbols gained new forms. Their urban design grew more complex. The continuity between the Canaanites and Phoenicians was not a break, but a flow, a cultural river that carved new channels without losing its source. The earliest Phoenician cities were more than ports. They were living monuments. And in places like Byblos, that life has never stopped. The people we now call Phoenicians did not think of themselves by that name. To the Greeks, they were Phoenics, the purple people, named for the prized dye they exported across the Mediterranean. But to themselves, they were men and women of Tyre, of Sidon, of Byblos. They identified first with their cities, not with any broader national label. Linguistically, the Phoenicians spoke a language from the West Semitic family, making them close relatives of the Canaanites, with whom they shared cultural and religious roots. Their language, now known as Phoenician, evolved from earlier Canaanite dialects and remained in use for centuries, even after their political independence faded. By around 1050 BC, the Phoenicians had developed their own written script, one of the first fully alphabetic systems in human history. It was a consonantal alphabet, or abjad, using 22 symbols written from right to left. This system was revolutionary. Unlike the complex syllabaries of Mesopotamia or the pictographs of Egypt, the Phoenician alphabet could be learned quickly, copied easily, and adapted by other cultures. Through trade and colonization, their writing spread to the Greeks, who added vowels and passed the system on to the Romans. But for the Phoenicians themselves, writing served practical needs, recording contracts, marking ownership, and inscribing dedications to the gods. The Phoenicians didn't build great libraries or write national epics, but their legacy in language and script was monumental, not for what they said, but for how they enabled others to speak, record, and remember. Phoenicia was not an empire. It had no central government, no single ruler, and no capital city. Instead, it was a collection of independent city-states, each perched along the rugged coastline, each with its own king, council, and ambitions. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, Arwad, these cities functioned like sovereign micro-kingdoms. They minted their own coins, built their own temples, and negotiated their own alliances or tributes with foreign powers. Sometimes they cooperated. Often they competed for trade routes, influence, and power at sea. This political fragmentation defined Phoenician history. There was no unifying monarch or national army. Yet, in many ways, the Phoenicians were bound together more strongly by culture than by force. They shared a common language, a common pantheon of gods, and similar artistic and architectural styles. A merchant from Sidon could travel to Tyre and feel at home, pray in the same kind of temple, speak the same dialect, and recognize the same symbols carved into city walls. This balance between rivalry and unity gave Phoenician civilization its unique character. It allowed each city to innovate and adapt. Some became trade giants, others centers of craft or religion, and while their disunity made them vulnerable to conquest by larger empires, Their shared culture allowed their identity to survive long after their independence was gone. In the end, Phoenicia was not one kingdom, but many scattered lights along a coastline, bound not by borders, but by belief, language, and the sea itself. The Phoenicians did not exist in isolation. Their coast opened them to the world, and from the very beginning, they embraced it. Surrounded by powerful neighbors, they chose not to challenge them in war, but to connect with them through trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Their relationship with Egypt was especially long-lasting. As early as the 3rd millennium BC, Byblos had become Egypt's gateway to the cedar forests of Lebanon. Ships sailed regularly between the two, carrying wood, ivory, papyrus, and gold. Egyptian influence left its mark on temples, burial customs, and art, but it did not erase Phoenician identity. Instead, it became part of it. From the Mesopotamians, they absorbed decorative motifs, winged figures, sacred trees, lion guardians, which they reimagined in ivory carvings and metalwork. From Anatolia, they took stylized animal forms, and from the Hittites, elements of royal iconography and temple design. The Phoenicians were not copyists, they were cultural translators. As time went on, more powerful empires moved in. The Assyrians, seeking tribute and control, left a heavy footprint. Phoenician kings had to send ships for Assyrian wars and pay heavy taxes. In exchange, they often received royal protection and access to new markets. Even under pressure, the Phoenicians remained distinct, never absorbed, always adaptive. They borrowed from others, yes, but what they borrowed, they transformed. Their culture became a mirror of the wider world, reflecting Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia, but always in Phoenician form. The story of the Phoenicians does not begin with a sudden rise or a dramatic arrival. Instead, it unfolds as a continuation, a cultural evolution rooted deeply in the Canaanite world of the ancient Levant. The cities we now call Phoenician Byblos, Sidon, Tyre were once Canaanite settlements. Their languages, beliefs, and traditions had already been developing for centuries. Archaeology shows no sharp break, no invasion or upheaval, but instead a slow transformation. What changed was not who they were, but how they engaged with the world. Many of the gods worshipped by the Phoenicians were direct descendants of Canaanite deities. El, the high god, Baal, the storm god, Astarte, goddess of love and war, all had roots in the older Canaanite pantheon. Their names, symbols, and myths lived on, reshaped to fit a new age of sea trade and cultural contact. Canaanite art and architecture also survived. Sacred motifs, palm trees, winged creatures, mountain altars continued in temple carvings and metalwork. But now they appeared alongside new influences. Egyptian patterns, Mesopotamian forms, Anatolian style, the Phoenicians absorbed without losing. What truly distinguished the Phoenicians was not that they broke from the past, but that they carried it forward. They gave the Canaanite tradition new energy and a maritime identity. Through their ships, their gods, and their language, they spread a culture that was ancient in its roots, yet dynamic in its reach. To understand the Phoenicians is to understand the living legacy of the Canaanites preserved not in ruins, but in sails, scripts, and sacred flame.